Hi, in this film I'll be speaking about the tremolos in the first movement of the Beethoven Pathetique sonata in relation to rotation. Now, if you've already tried rotation and you're finding it's not necessarily helping, maybe you even feel more bogged down when you try to rotate, this is exactly the video for you, because I'm going to show you why that will be a very common problem and how to do certain specifics in such a way that we can definitely ensure rotation is the source of freedom rather than the source of becoming heavy in the keys and working even harder. So I'll just show you briefly what it should look like. Is probably something like this. Nice open hand. Now I'll talk about the standard explanations which are most commonly used, which have some very big simplifications. Basically, a lot of people will say, imagine there's a shaft running down the centre of the forearm and we do a small movement back and forth as if we're turning the forearm around that central shaft. And it's a bit like a seesaw maybe, where we apply energy into the fifth finger and the thumb and we alternate the rotation around a centre, as if it's like the central pivot of a seesaw, back and forth, driving those into the keys. Now, whenever I did that, it would look something like this. I'm exaggerating now, but basically I would just squash those fingers. On the other hand, supposing I made them very stiff to make sure they couldn't get squashed, it would just work even harder, arguably. It's not getting squashed, it's just jamming in a very stiff position. As I say, it should look something more like this. Light and easy, shouldn't be digging in at all. Now, the problem is that the model is not actually terribly accurate at all. Anatomy doesn't work that way. Physically, it's not actually about driving all the energy from the rotation. What I'll show you is essentially that chiefly you've got to mobilise your fingers and you have to be able to move the fingers well into the keys while you turn around those fingers. Don't try that straight away. We'll build into that through a few different steps first. But that's essentially the model, that it's chiefly finger movement accompanied by rotation. It's not rotation as a power source. I mean, this piano is very heavy indeed. I would sometimes get away with this kind of mindset more on light actions. It wasn't great, but I get away with it. On this piano, a heavy action, I haven't got a hope in hell of making it work. If I pretend there's a fixed centre down the middle and the driving energy around that centre, it's going to get horribly stuck straight away. If I simply stand on my fingers and let the arm rotate around those, it works great. Anyway, so let's go into a bit of anatomy firstly about centres of rotation. Now, a lot of people say it's only forearm rotation, no shoulder, no upper arm rotation. This is not quite true, although it's quite close. I'll show you why there's quite an important distinction here, that we should be very aware of the upper arm too. Now, this can go too far. We don't want to do these kind of huge things. I suppose that's why some people say it's forearm only rotation, because it can certainly go too far. I'll show you why we need a little bit of involvement from that. So anyway, I'll put a link to a video showing a skeleton. Now, the forearm works with two bones. The ulnar runs down the fifth finger side. If the arm is this way round, the radius runs down the thumb side, and they sit side by side. Now, this is the natural state for the arm to be in, side by side. When we play the piano, we tend to start to think of this as the normal place to be, and that can cause a lot of stiffness, actually, because that's not the natural position. The more natural position is this way round. And if you touch the underside of the forearm by the fifth finger, can you feel there how basically the bones are wrapping around each other, going into a crossed shape? So rotation essentially drives the thumb around the fifth finger as a centre. You can apply a lot of energy by doing it and get a real old slap. On the other hand, keep touching at the underside here by the fifth finger. If we simply unwrap that, see how that's not really doing anything to send energy through finger 5 by reversing the process. And it's very important to understand this, that forearm rotation is quite limited. It's not easy to use that to drive that. You can see that my upper arm has to start coming into it if I want to drive finger 5 down. So sometimes that's a good thing. I'm not saying we should never do this, but we have to be quite cautious about doing that. So hold your hands on the piano, elbows into your side. Do this a bit, whack the thumbs against the surface of the keys. We've got plenty of freedom there. Even you can play with quite extreme pressure there, and there's plenty of power available there. Now try and do the same on your fifth finger. Firstly, you can't do this without engaging the upper arm, so you can't get away from the keys. All you can do is slump like that, which is not a good way to apply rotation. If you come out here, then you can apply a little bit of upper arm rotation. And the reason this is so important is it mobilises everything, basically. It stops us getting this stuck feeling. If I were to try the trills from the Brahms First Concerto, which has an octave plus a note, and keep my elbows in close, forearm only rotation, then it will just get horribly stuck. I need to mobilise it. In fact, you'll see most pianists playing this, or at least a lot of pianists, will extend their arms entirely. So it's actually quite important, if we do have to power finger 5 with rotation, this is going to have to play some kind of a role, almost for certain. Okay, so using those concepts, I'm going to follow on. I'll show you close-ups now of the hand in the keys. So the first thing to say is actually I didn't show fast in the end of how it used to go wrong when I was trying to power with the rotations. So if I show you trying to go fast, that jamming up, that's no good at all. Now, the big problem there, forget moving the keys for the time being. We want to look at what happens in between the keys. And I assure you, if you feel heavy and stuck, you need to pay much more attention to what happens to set you up before a finger moves a key than to actually moving the key itself. So basically, yeah, the thing of the centre. Finger 5 is the centre here. Very important we can open up around here. And that's what will mean the thumb is free to take the key. You want to do this exercise in both directions, where you check around one finger, the other one is free, alive and able to move well, just by tapping the surface. We'll go a little bit more into the anatomy behind that now in terms of the centres though. So our natural anatomical centre is finger 5. And that means this is the inside of the hand. This is a very weird thing. Good exercise to try, and I don't try and force this if you can't make it, but I can basically touch the octave, come around like this. As I say, don't try and force it, but just see, can you be free enough to get somewhere around there? This clarifies that that's very much the centre. Now, you can sort of cheat on this one. The upper arm gets hugely involved. You don't need to worry about that one. That gets a bit silly. But it's a very natural thing if you can find the freedom to turn around this one. This is our true centre. Really important to remember that. However, we have to have an adaptive centre as well. We need to be able to make the thumb a centre. So when the thumb becomes the centre, I'll show you actually, if I come back from 5 first and play the thumb for the time being. Now, our forearm rotation, remember twisting the bones around each other, the forearm rotation itself stops there, there's nowhere left to go. That's not good, that causes impact. If we suddenly stop energy, it's got nowhere to go. It's like a car crashing into a wall. We want a rebound to some extent. So when we get here, the thumb has to actually take over as a centre. And as I said before, the upper arm has to get involved. If it's only the forearm down, when you do this, there's nothing left. You're just stuck, jammed. Okay, you can back off. Now, we haven't got poise by backing off. To get the poise, we need to actually continue a little bit around the thumb. And that's what sets up finger 5. In association to the thumb, this relationship, this living feeling of transferring pressures back and forth. It's all based on, do we feel poise? Does that feel good? Or have we jammed in? I mean, any fool can jam energy into the piano. That's not difficult. The stuff we need to concentrate on is how we stand up against what we put in the piano. If I go slow, I can do that, just jam everything in. No problem in a slow tempo. I mean, it's not healthy, but we can get away with it if it's slow. The moment you go fast, that's where it's exposed. It's completely useless. So to be able to go fast, we need to look more at how we sustain up forces that create balance, less at driving the key down, and more about what we do around the keys as they go down. That we're not losing our stature, we're not giving way, we're open and we're free, ready to do the next thing with an effortless quality. If we tune into that first, the playing becomes easy around that. So in fact, I'll even do it on the lid for a bit actually. So yeah, turning around here. Remember, the key thing is maintain a distance between your thumb and 5th finger. If that gets squashed, you may even find you can't even get the thumb on top of the 5th finger. So we're just sustaining the distance. In this direction, 5 is the natural centre. This all comes from the forearm, basically. Just a very minute response in the upper arm. You don't need to do much. In fact, if I show you in the mirror while I do that, you can see there's almost nothing happening at all there, basically. However, the other way round, to get our continuation around the thumb, this is where we do have to slightly mobilise the upper arm. As I say, if we do that and stop, it's all dead. If we have somewhere to go, we can absorb the continuation and it's nice and free. So it's redirection of energy, like a bouncing ball, basically. Imagine you chuck a ball and it just stops dead on the ground. Well, if you had a steel ball, it basically would. If you've got a really heavy steel ball, drop it, stops dead. Obviously, there's a lot of impact. A rubber ball will bounce, and there's nothing like the impact when the energy goes elsewhere. So this is what we have to understand, that we're not looking to just drive the key and then, yeah, we're done. The important part is afterwards. If we just have a little bit of continuation, that's our poise, we've absorbed the energy. The mass absorbs it, and it's as good as if the energy vanishes if it does it slowly. If it does it all in one go, it actually causes pain and impact. Stress is associated with that sudden stop. So in both directions, continuation is the first thing we have to learn. Turn around the natural centre on 5, gently take the key, don't even think too much about how you put it down for now, but then turn around that. Then as we start to play, we need to feel that the outside of the hand is pulled. As the thumb goes down, that pulls the 5th finger around it. Now, I'll show you a little way of understanding this. If you get a pencil, if you turn a pencil around the centre and just sort of flick it against something like this. Now, you won't see this in the film, but hopefully you can feel. So you need to try this for yourself, certainly. When you flick it, we're turning around that centre at first. When it lands, there'll be a slight pull back against your fingers. If you hold it very lightly indeed, you should feel the response. It wants to start turning around the new centre where it's made contact. So it's very much the same thing. Conservation of energy is how we avoid straining ourselves. We give the energy somewhere to go. We don't think, yeah, now I'm done. You're going to squash the hand. You're going to have all these problems. Instead of digging in, think of what comes out of the key. It's what goes elsewhere that matters the most. Now, I know we don't do this when we play for real, of course not. Or at least we don't see it. But consider there's just such a slight version, like with the pencil. We could feel it if we flick it out that way. We feel a tiny sense of the pencil pulling at the fingers. It's a very similar thing. So it could be this small in the end. There's just that slight sense that it pulls finger 5 up and out of the key. It can be as small as that. And then we're standing, we're poised, we're good to do something else. Same thing the other way around. Get your finger 5 ready on the key. And think of it, remember, 5 is the centre, turn around that centre. Don't think of the 5 as the outside of the hand, remember, it's not. Don't try and drive it like this around the thumb. We may say the thumb is the centre at first if we do a big movement like this, but the moment we get there, 5 takes the key. As the centre, we turn around that centre to give the spare energy somewhere to go. And this is the really big thing. If you can develop that sense of ending in poise, not by digging in, anyone can dig in, that's so easy, and then it ruins everything. These up forces are the ones we really need around a clear, precise centre. If you just hold up and you haven't got a clear, precise centre, this would be something else altogether, like shoving the wrist high in the air. Completely different issue. So keep the wrist nicely aligned while this happens. Generate the up force around the centre, turn around it. Here we get the ease, now we get that kind of feeling. Fingers start to move the keys. Thumb takes the key, that kind of pulls the 5th finger out of the key along with it. 5th finger takes the key, that pulls the thumb out of the key along with it. So they're very much associated. In fact, it's probably a better perspective to say the rotation is what takes the finger out of a key, than the rotation is what drives the key. While the thumb takes the key, we turn around it, that takes the 5th finger up. While the 5th finger takes the key, that takes the thumb out of the key. So it's just that little bit of continuation. We're not aiming to stop at the key. We're aiming to do just enough. And that's a really good way of measuring it, I think. Think of it as just enough to remove the old one. Not enough to actually go over here in the end. We don't need the big ones when we play the real version. That's just the initial practice exercise. We just do enough, the old finger's gone, the old finger's gone. Then when we start to make that more concise, we're very close in the keys, and my forearm, it really doesn't do that much at all. Again, if I try to drive it from the forearm, if I imagine a centre in the middle, all I'm going to do is be squashing my fingers. And this is a very heavy piano. It's the opposite of what a lot of people think. On a heavy piano, you need the fingers to do their job properly, all the more so. It's not a case of less finger, more arm when the piano is heavy. It's a case of it's all the more important still that that finger has a minimum job to do. So another way of putting it is whatever the arm does, if it does bear into the finger, that's not helping the finger, it's not doing its job for it. It's sending a bill to that finger. If I want to push on my thumb That's a bill for my thumb. It had to do a minimum to stand up against it. If it doesn't pay its bill, we're back in that squash stuff. Try that actually. Try and feel finger 5 on its key while you're squashed to see how bad that's going to be. Come back to finger 5, do the same thing, squash that one. Try and feel the thumb. It'll be so obvious when you're squashed, there's no ability for the next one to move well. So the setting up has to open us. Then there's freedom. Open up, then there's freedom. So anyway, I hope that gives you a lot of ideas to play with. And yeah, if you think in the right way, discover what's really going on internally with the anatomy, open up around the fingers. You'll learn the things that can make it seem as if in the end, it's as if all we're doing is turning around a centre because it's so small. But the only reason it looks that simple is because the movement is so small. It's just not a big enough movement to shatter the illusion. It's not really turning around a single centre. It's turning around this one. It's turning around this one. That's the missing thing that's very rarely stated, that we're changing centre in response to the action of the fingers. And that's the primary reason rotation actually happens.